July 31st is the feast of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and whenever the Catholic Church celebrates a feast day of a saint on the church calendar, it is always set on the day the saint died, as it is his birthday, you might say, into his second baptism, his death into life, his union with God. So, July 31st, we celebrate the life of Ignatius, the patron of this Georgetown community and of all Jesuit institutions around the world. I want to spend just a couple minutes with you giving my reflections on Ignatius of Loyola. I don't even know how much you know about Ignatius, a Spanish knight of Basque descent, born in 1491, just as Columbus was sailing to the New World, of his being wounded at battle in Pamplona and his long convalescence back home, of his conversion to leave the world of knighthood and devote himself to Christ, of his return to grammar school while in his 30s, just so that he could master Latin and go on for higher education, of his trip to Jerusalem, where he is literally kicked out by the Franciscan friars because of his over-ardent devotion, of his time at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris, where he gathered some friends together on fire to do something great for God, and of his last 16 years of life in Rome as the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, building up and governing this small company of friends into a network of schools and missions for the greater glory of God. Ignatius led an extraordinary life. But what kind of man was Ignatius? How might we Hoyas who work and study and pray together understand his attitude, his vision? I want to suggest that Ignatius holds within him two competing attitudes that are very much needed today as we endure this pandemic, as we awake again to the racial injustice in our nation. The first of these competing attitudes is his realism. Ignatius was a realist. His head was not in an ivory tower, nor was his spiritual life removed and cloistered in a monastery away from the rest of the world. He was immersed in the daily routine, the daily work, the labor of the world. His prayer was always centered on the needs of those before him, on the personal interactions he had with the entire range of people, rich or poor. Ignatius spent his time in prayer examining where God was in the tasks of his day, asking himself the question of how could he help construct a better world, a world that is good, true, and beautiful. But as a realist, he also saw the world as it is, not as black and white, but really, to quote Graham Greene, the novelist, a world that is black and gray. He saw the effects of sin in his world, in the court politics of his day, and in the church politics of his day. He experienced firsthand poverty and even experienced plague and famine. He was imprisoned by the church's Inquisition and later exonerated. He saw how darkness always hovered around all his endeavors. We too are realists. Whether we're faculty or staff or students or alumni, we pride ourselves on being realists, engaged in the world. But if Ignatius was only a realist, he would also be a fatalist, someone who says, well, thus is the world, and so let's do all our best to stay ahead of it. Realism, at its worst, feels that we can't really change the world. We can only manage to be on top of it, to stay in the top echelon of the people competing for goods and services, accumulations of things to protect us from a world of black and gray. That is why Ignatius seems to me not only to be a realist, but an optimist too. This is the second attitude that is married to his realism. Ignatius really believed and felt in his bones that if God was in all things, then everything, all material reality, all things could be a revelation of God. Ignatius, the optimist, tempered his vision of the world with real hope and real love and real faith that exists in the grayness of life, that exists in the grayness of pandemics. He could inspire his friends to work hard, but at the same time, not to take themselves too seriously. He understood that the good in him and the good in everyone around him was always a work in progress, always under construction, you might say. Philosophically, we might call Ignatius a Christian humanist, someone who has a real faith in the dignity and respect for life and all humanity, but always married to a faith in a God who desires this dignity and ability to be lived in its fullest. Now, Ignatius might be known throughout history as the ultimate soldier of Christ. That's how I was first introduced to him in high school. But the title that we Jesuits most often use to refer to him is that of a pilgrim. I like this way of talking about Ignatius because it puts his realism and his optimism in a healthy tension. A pilgrim lives in the real world, optimistic that the journey itself is leading us somewhere and to some kind of fullness. So we celebrate Ignatius the pilgrim, a disciple of Christ on a journey of discovery, laboring for what is good and true and beautiful. And let all of us, all us Hoyas, follow our patron saint. For like him, the good in us is under construction in this gray world of ours. Let us be pilgrims on the lookout for God, our senses focused on how to discern God's presence in the people we encounter each day and in the university that inspires and watches over us. St. Ignatius, pray for us.